Brian Unhinged here, and I just gotta say, Noam Chomsky is kind of full of shit. What he's saying about Ukraine, the clip that's been floating around the last few hours, I gotta respond to it because I know many people all over Ukraine. I know many Ukrainians who now live here, where I live, and I'm getting a very strong pulse on what Ukrainians are thinking, what Ukrainians are feeling. I'm talking to my friends who are living in Ukraine every single day. I've got friends in a lot of the regions, including occupied Kherson, including the east and in the west. So I'm getting a pretty good pulse, as well as following Ukrainian journalists, news sources, and politicians.
Well, in the Western propaganda system, what we hear is Ukrainian people want more and more arms. That's the US and British propaganda system.
His first assessment is that Ukrainians don't actually want weapons. This is all a Western propaganda machine. I can tell you from talking to and reading from Ukrainians, they want weapons. From well before we were willing to send anything, tanks, planes, anything like that. Very early in the war, I was at a number of rallies and there were a lot of signs like NATO close the skies, NATO give us weapons. That was a very strong sentiment from American Ukrainians who were watching what was happening to their country, as well as when I talked to my Ukrainian friends who are still living in Ukraine, close the sky, give us weapons, give us tanks, give us artillery. All of that was very, very strong public sentiment within Ukraine, and that has not disappeared at all. Ukrainians want weapons. They want to be able to fight. They want to be able to kick the Russians out.
If we look at what's happening, Zelensky, who's as much of a voice of the Ukrainian people as we have any idea about.
All right, the next thing that he says is basically Zelensky, who's got, he's as much of a voice of the Ukrainian people as we have any idea about. This is the thing that kind of pissed me off the most, maybe, about everything he said, because he has this idea that we just can't know what the Ukrainian people think. And like I just talked about, I'm talking to Ukrainian people every day. I've got 4 friends that I'm messaging with almost every single day who are in Ukraine and have a good pulse on it, as well as all the reporters, all the news articles, all the politicians. We don't have to, theorize and wonder just based on what Zelensky's saying that Ukrainians want weapons. And Zelensky himself has been pretty damn consistent that he wants weapons. Early on, he was very open to trying to negotiate with Russia to stop the bloodshed, but it became quite apparent very quickly that their diplomats would say one thing and then their army would do something else, either at the same time they were negotiating or right after. They'd be like, yeah, we'll retreat from Kyiv, and then they would shell the living shit out of Kyiv within a few hours. So it was pretty obvious that Russia was full of shit. And so, of course, Zelensky has lost a lot of his interest in negotiating with Russia. He's said many times he's not willing to give up land to Russia for a peace deal. What Chomsky's saying is just flat out misinformation. I don't know if he's deliberately, peddling misinformation, or if he's just insanely ignorant of what's actually going on and isn't aware that we literally can get a pulse on what average Ukrainians are thinking, what reporters are thinking, what politicians are thinking. We literally can. We've never had a war in my memory where there's been so much information that we've been able to gather about.
Zelensky, who's as much of a voice of the Ukrainian people as we have any idea about, has repeatedly called for a political settlement in which Ukraine will, a pretty sensible settlement, in which Ukraine will will commit itself to neutralization, no NATO, no NATO membership, crucial point, will put off the issue of Crimea to some future because can't deal with it now. We'll move towards some kind of accommodation on Donbass. That's what you don't hear in the US British propaganda system.
All right. Zelensky said that Ukraine's willing to submit itself to neutralization. No, I don't think Zelensky has ever said that. That was never something that he was interested in, or if he was, it was abandoned very, very quickly. And nobody in Ukraine wants that, especially seeing what Russia has done to them. Pretty much everybody in Ukraine wants to at least be part of the European Union. They're already applying for that. They want to be a part of NATO because what they're seeing is that not being a part of NATO means that Russia feels like it can just blow the living shit out of them. And that's not, that's not cool. Nobody wants that. There is a very, very strong sentiment, given how much devastation Russia has done to Ukraine, that there are a lot of Ukrainians who want to take back Crimea, who want to completely take back the Donbass region. They are not willing to negotiate. They'd rather fight longer for freedom than to, go back to essentially the borders before the war. Things have progressed to such a level that most Ukrainians, I won't say all Ukrainians, I can't speak for all Ukrainians, but all the Ukrainians that I've spoken to and talked to and, read what they're saying, they want to take back Crimea. They want to take back the Donbass region. They don't want to go back to, February 23rd, because that just doesn't make sense. All that would allow Russia to do is just regroup and try again. So they want, Russia to be soundly defeated, kicked completely out of Ukraine, and the war to actually end. Because it's actually been a war going on since 2014 in the Donbass region. It just escalated quite a bit on February 24th. The Ukrainians, that's what the Ukrainians are saying. That's what the Ukrainians actually want. They literally want to beat the crap out of Russia. They want heavy guns. They want modern weapons. The Ukrainian military is literally asking, give us, strong modern weapons, train our military on modern jets, train us on modern tanks, give us modern anti-tank weapons, modern rifles, modern equipment, modern artillery. And personally, that's why, versus some other wars that the United States has been involved in, I am much more supportive of the United States being involved in and supplying weapons in Ukraine. Now, I recognize people are not all going to hold that view, but from, as I said, speaking extensively with all manner of Ukrainians all over Ukraine and following their journalists, following, soldiers on the front lines, following their politicians, following their newspapers. That is the sentiment. That is what people want. And personally, I think we should respect that, and I am for supplying Ukraine with everything it needs to defeat the Russians. If you enjoy my random unhinged conversations, subscribe and give this video a like, and I'll catch you in the next one.